Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MAG's fourth webinar of 2018, 5 Ways to Optimize Your Interchange Costs Now. This is Mary Kay Carlson with the MAG staff, and we welcome MAG current and prospect members. We've had another great turnout with over 150 registrants. Before we begin, I would like to take a few minutes to cover some housekeeping items. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. Simply type your question in the question box located on your GoToWebinar control panel. We will field as many questions as time allows. Following the presentation, you will receive an email with a webinar survey link. We strongly encourage you to complete the brief survey, as it's important for the MAG to know what you think of this kind of webinar in terms of value and future webinar offerings. Also, today's presentation is being recorded, and both the recording and the presentation slides will be available in the members-only section of the MAG website following the conclusion of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce the speakers for today's webinar. Anand Goyal is the CEO and founder of Optimized Payments Consulting. Mr. Goyal is a noted expert in the payments industry. He is on the Payments Editorial Advisory Board at the Association for Financial Professionals and has spoken at numerous industry conferences. Greg Moore is Director of Treasury Operations at AutoNation, Inc. Mr. Moore is responsible for treasury management activities to support AutoNation's corporate headquarters, shared services center, and 200-plus retail locations. I will now hand it over to Mr. Goyal to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Mary Kay, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending the webinar. We have a lot of information to share with you today. And then I'm going to turn it over to Greg at AutoNation, where he's going to share their journey of optimizing interchange. As I go through the deck, feel free to type in your questions into the questions box. And if a question is relevant for a given slide, we'll answer it right then and there. Else, we have allotted 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the webinar to answer your questions. So we really want to make it valuable for you. So if you think of any question, feel free to type in your question into the question box. So with that, guys, let's get started. So the objectives, the learning objectives for this webinar are to understand the variables that impact interchange fees, identify a framework for optimizing interchange fees, and specifically, we're going to give you five tips. And then by managing interchange, it'll help you understand how you can manage the overall cost of card payments. And then Greg Moore from AutoNation is going to share their success story and their continued journey of optimizing interchange. So I'm going to give you guys a quick slide about who Optimized Payments is and my background. We're going to talk about interchange in the framework of card processing fees, talk about 5 specific ways you can optimize interchange. Let's get going. About Optimized Payments. We're an independent consulting firm based in Atlanta. We started this company over 11 years ago. And the consulting team is made up of industry experts from the merchant acquiring space. We have industry insider experience. However, we are not affiliated with any acquirer, processor, reseller, and our focus is primarily to provide consulting and payment analytics to clients in the US and Canada. And we mainly focus on Fortune 2000 clients, clients doing hundreds of millions or billions in card payments. Over the last 11 years that we've been in business, we've helped clients save over 100 million in card-related fees. And we also manage merchant services RFPs, and we've managed over 30 of them. So that's a little bit about us. When we dive into talking about interchange fees, it's important to kind of step back a bit and understand the role interchange fees play in the overall cost of card payments. This pie chart shows for large merchants who are processing at least 100 million in card sales a year, interchange represents about 85% of the total cost of card processing. Now, these are averages. for your specific organization, the numbers might be higher or slightly lower, but this is rough ballpark. So 85% goes to interchange fees of all the fees you pay towards card processing. 85 is from interchange. 8% goes to card network assessments and dues. These are the fees that go to Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. And the remaining 7% go to the acquirers and gateways. And so we're going to be, because interchange is the lion's share of your overall cost, we're going to be focusing on it for the duration of this presentation. But as we go through it, if you guys have questions about the other components, feel free to ask. Because we have folks with varying degrees of background and knowledge of card processing, we want to just make sure everyone is level set in terms of how we define interchange. Interchange is the wholesale price charged by Visa, MasterCard, and Discover for settling a credit card or a signature debit card transaction. All the interchanges you as merchants pay go to the bank that issued that particular card. So for example, if you use a Citibank Visa credit card at a Macy's department store and charge $100, the interchange cost associated with that transaction, assuming that card got the interchange of Visa CPS Retail at 1.51% and 10 cents, the total interchange is $1.61. That entire amount goes to Citibank. And you can get the latest interchange tables from Visa's, MasterCard's respective websites. And if you have Discover acquiring, you can get the Discover interchange rates from your card processor. Or if you have a Discover direct relationship, you can get it directly from Discover. So what does interchange pay for? You know, the main thing is I love getting points and miles when I use my card. So the biggest thing one of the biggest things that interchange pays for is all the benefits and rewards that we as consumers get for using our cards. And so interchange pays for your rewards programs and also pays for the cost of money, because there are a lot of us who pay off our monthly card bills at the end of the month. And when you do so, you basically got an interest-free loan from your card issuer to charge up that money, pay the balance on your credit card bill, and you had no interest charges. So in those instances, you were basically able to borrow money at free cost. So interchange pays for the cost of money for the bank, pays for the rewards programs, and it pays for internal costs, including fraud. And then lastly, interchange is also a profit center for issuers. A study that we looked at a couple of years ago, it said of all the interchange revenue that's collected by banks, about 40 to 45% goes to their bottom line in terms of profit. The U.S. has one of the highest interchange rates in the developed world. And I want to specify credit interchange rates, because debit interchange rates are regulated by the Durbin Amendment, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So interchange fees can be managed, and we're going to present a framework. But in some instances, you can also negotiate interchange fees directly with Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. And merchants who are really large or in emerging markets, they've had success in negotiating interchange fees. The scope of this conversation is going to be talking about optimizing and managing interchange versus negotiating interchange. One of the questions that we get from a lot of merchants is, you know, when you go download Visa and MasterCard's interchange tables and you get the Discover interchange table and you add up all the unique rates together, there are over 700 unique interchange rates. So the first question is, why do we have so many? Why is this so complex? Well, there are a lot of macro and micro considerations that contribute to the growth in the number of interchange rates. And let me present some of those to you. I'm seeing a couple of questions in the question box here. Is confirmed that the deck is available. Yes, it's going to be available to you guys after this webinar. So why are there so many interchange rates? Number one, some of the macro considerations is there's competition amongst the card networks. The two dominant card networks in the US are Visa and MasterCard. As they try to grow their volumes, they're trying to get card issuers or banks to issue cards with their logo on it, right? So when they go out in the marketplace and they're competing for banks, and that, banks don't turn over their portfolios very often, but when they do, they're looking to see which brand offers, various features and benefits. But one of the things they look at is which brand has higher interchange rates for various card types. So competition amongst the card networks actually causes interchange rates to go up than to go down. So that's a bit perverse, right? And then there's also card network and issuer strategies. Card networks and issuers, they have a common goal, which is to grow volume. And one of the ways they grow volume is they want to go into emerging markets. So imagine, can you think of about 15 years ago, were there any vending machines taking cards or parking meters? Now there are. And that's because the card networks and the issuers have specifically gone after small ticket space, and they've created new interchange categories that are favorable to small ticket. And they've been able to penetrate those markets, as well as markets like, rent payments. So I remember growing up, most landlords of apartment complexes didn't take cards. And the card industry has been able to penetrate that somewhat, not significantly, but have been able to make inroads by creating new interchange rates that are favorable to these emerging markets. And the same thing kind of goes for utilities. And one of the prominent ones that comes to mind is grocery stores. I remember growing up as a kid, none of the grocery stores that we visited, my family visited, took cards, but now just about every store does. And grocery is the number one vertical in terms of card volume in the United States, because everybody uses credit and debit cards when you go to the grocery store. And the way the card industry was able to get the grocery stores to take cards is they created new interchange categories that capped the interchange fees for that vertical. So, and the last macro consideration is legislation. As you guys can recall, the Durbin Amendment went into effect in October 2011, which created new set of interchange rates for regulated financial institutions and capped debit interchange fees at 5 basis points and 22 cents. And then you come to the micro considerations. So there are specific, out of those 700 rates, there's specific rates that apply to certain industries, and that is determined by your merchant category code. There are specific rates for airlines, hotels, restaurants, e-com, retail, certain emerging markets. So your MCC plays an important role. Then the type of card. Not all Visa cards are equal. There's Visa traditional, reward, signature, debit, corporate cards. So the type of card. Method of entry. Is the card swiped or dipped versus keyed in? In general, key transactions or card not present transactions carry higher interchange rates. And the last micro consideration is the risk of a transaction and adherence to the card network's compliance standards. And out of all of these sort of variables, the one that you as merchants can control and influence is the risk and adherence to compliance standards. And we'll talk about that. And this really gets into the type, what's controllable by you versus what's not controllable. So what's not controllable is the type of card a consumer is going to use. What's not controllable is your merchant category code. Your MCC is determined by your acquirer when you go through the underwriting process. Although you can't control it, you should validate your MCC code, because sometimes we have seen instances where during the underwriting process, a merchant was not coded the right, didn't receive the right industry classification, and they paid a slightly higher interchange rate than they should have. Or the reverse can also be true. They were given an MCC rate, they gave them favorable rates, but obviously the merchant didn't want to correct it because it was beneficial to them. So you want to validate your MCC code. Another thing that's not controllable is the method of entry, because if you're an e-commerce player, you're never going to have swipe or gift cards transactions. Another uncontrollable is, your transaction or your ticket size. But what is controllable are your business processes. Things like AVS, address verification system, timeliness between authorization and settlement, transactional data attributes like sending level 2, level 3 data for commercial cards, and network routing. And we'll talk more about each one of these elements in the subsequent slides. So let's dive in. So this is one of the 5 controllable variables, one of the 5 things you can do. Before we get into this content, I'm going to do a quick polling question just to see, just to make it more interactive. I'm going to put a polling question up there for you. This is completely anonymous. You can answer the question, and I'm going to wait about 15 seconds and then share the results with everybody on the call. So the question is, what is your overall effective cost of processing credit and debit cards? So these are all of your fees divided by your net card sales. So go ahead and, if you know it, go ahead and put it in. If you don't know it, that's okay. And we'll wait a couple seconds here, and then we'll close it, and I will share the poll with you. We'll wait 2 more seconds, and there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and share the results with you. So the question was, what's your overall cost, effective cost of processing cards? About 40% of you said less than 2%, another 38, 2 to 2.5. So basically about 78% is less than 2.5%, and then the 11% is over 2.5, and then about 13% don't know. And obviously this can vary dramatically by industry. If you are a grocer, it is very likely your overall weighted effective cost is around 1% or below 1%. And the same might be true if you're an insurance company. However, if you're an e-commerce player, it's more likely closer to 2.5%. So it really depends on not only your industry, but your customer, your ticket size, and your demographic. Because the lower the ticket size, the heavier usage of debit cards, and therefore your costs might be lower too. All right, thank you guys for participating. So let's get into the first topic, first recommendation on optimizing interchange rates, which is AVS. AVS is used for card not present and keyed Visa and Discover transactions. So it's basically verifying the billing information of a that is registered with the issuer with the billing information that you input either at the point of sale or on a website. And the minimum that's required is the numeric value, which is a zip code. But you, as a merchant, you can also do the numeric value of the address. So in this example, 123 Elm Street and the zip code 90210. Whenever you have a card not present or a key transaction, you have the ability to send both these numeric values to the card network, to your acquirer, which sends it to the card network, which sends it to the issuer, to validate both of those values. As what a lot of merchants end up doing is, instead of 2 values, because they oftentimes send in just the zip code, and they do a zip code match. So it is, although only Visa and Discover require it, we recommend as a best practice that you do it for all of your card types. And doing AVS it does have impact on your interchange rates, because if you don't do AVS, you end up paying higher interchange fees than if you do. And there are 3 main rules that you want to keep in mind in regards to AVS and interchange. As I mentioned, the zip code is a minimum. For card present transactions, AVS requires there's a match on the zip code. So whatever you type in with what's on file with the card issuer for that customer has to match. For card not present, you just have to do an AVS attempt. You can have a mismatch. If you do, it doesn't result in a downgrade, meaning you're going to pay the same interchange fee. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the term downgrade, and let me quickly define it. It is simply when you do not get the optimal interchange rate for a given transaction. So a better rate was available, but you didn't because of a business process. And again, guys, as I go through here, if any of these concepts are confusing or you want some further clarification, please put in a question in the question box. Second tip on optimizing interchange is timeliness between authorizations and settlements. So, the axiom that time equals money, well, that's true for interchange as well. Transactions have time limits for processing optimally. If you exceed those preset time limits, you will pay incremental, your transaction will downgrade and you'll pay higher interchange fees. Here's the general rules of thumb. If you are in a retail environment, you settle transactions within 24 hours from purchase date. So 24 hours is optimal, and then if you're in a card not present environment, let's see here. If you're not in a card not present environment, you want to hold that off. You want to hold that authorization. You're allowed 7 days before you ship product. Generally, if you're an e-commerce player, you charge the cardholder when the product is shipped. You might authorize today, but the actual settlement occurs when you ship product. So you're given a 7-day window from the date of authorization to the time you ship the product, but there are going to be instances when, if you're out of stock, you may not ship within that seven-day window. So what you want to do to avoid downgrades or higher interchange fees, you can reverse the original authorization, get a new authorization, so that you get a new time frame to work with. So just to kind of a recap for timeliness, within a retail environment, most retailers have automated systems that auto close at the end of the day. It might be, depending on where you're located, it might be midnight, 1 a.m., whatever the time frame is. Most retailers have an auto close. But in the e-commerce environment, there has to be additional business rules added that maintain those authorizations as fresh as possible. So we've, over the years, e-commerce players have written in logic that look at whenever you settle a transaction, they'll look at the date when the authorization occurred. And if that authorization was greater than 7 days, they go ahead and reverse out that auth and get a fresh new authorization to settle against. A third tip on optimizing interchange rates relates to commercial cards. So commercial cards, they come in various flavors. There are, when you think of commercial cards, I mean, they're basically, in the United States, there's two types of cards. There's consumer cards that you and I as consumers carry, and then there are commercial cards. Cards typically carried by businesses of all sizes, small and large. So when you think of commercial cards, they're going to be business cards. They're typically geared more towards smaller businesses. And then you have corporate cards, purchasing cards, and fleet cards that are typically carried by larger businesses. And the idea behind commercial cards is you're probably accepting commercial cards whether you know it or not. But what you want to do is, if you have a large amount of commercial cards you do accept, and you can identify that based on doing interchange analysis, is you want to send level 2, level 3 data for those transactions in your settlement file. Because when you do so, you get much lower interchange rates. And I'm going to give you some specific examples. And the card networks are giving you an incentive to send enhanced data. And because what they do with that enhanced data is they then can take that information and package it and give it back to the the companies whose employees are using their card. So they can give them information like, hey, your employees paid X amount in sales taxes. And that could be beneficial for the corporation in their reporting requirements. Or your employees bought these kind of SKUs and products at these industries, because it can help them provide more insight on their spend. So there's basically an incentive to give you better interchange rates when you send enhanced data. There are 2 step-ups in data. There's level 2, and then there's level 3. For level 2, it simply means sending in, the checkboxes that we have here, some merchant demographic information like tax ID, state, zip, customer code. It can be any value. It could be customer ID, a shipping number. It can be anything. There's no validation required. Sales tax indicator and a sales tax amount. Now, the key thing about a sales tax amount, it has to be between 0.1% and to 22%. If you are a tax-exempt organization, or you have transactions that are tax-exempt, meaning like you sell product to schools, and the school doesn't have to pay sales tax, unfortunately, those transactions will not qualify for level 2. It has to be, the sales tax amount has to be non-zero. And, level 2 data is supported by most major POS providers, gateways, and processors. Sales tax, it can't be zero, and there's some exceptions that are specific to MasterCard. And then the second level of data is level 3. And with level 3, it's a bit more complex, and it requires a little bit more data. But this table on the right here shows you the different data elements that are required for level 3. One important thing to note about level 3 is you need a minimum of a single record. So even though a customer might come in on whether it's a website or to a physical store, they could buy 100 different SKUs from you in a single charge. In order to qualify for level 3, you're not required to send all the 100 SKUs. The minimum that's required is to send a single SKU line item. And that can have a lot of, important, valuable implications for you as merchants, because you can program your systems in a way where you send in the minimum level of data and still get level 3 qualification. And in order to get level 3, you can still have sales tax. You can have sales tax that is 0. So for level 3 requirements, sales tax doesn't have to be greater than 0. And here's an illustration of interchange rates. When I talk about level 1, that's basically base rates. That's sending the same data you send today that you would send for a consumer card. That's level 1. Level 2 is sending sales tax. Level 3 is sending a single SKU line item. And you can see the variance, the differential between level 1 and level 3 in some of these categories ranges anywhere from 5 basis points to 165 basis points. And so for in this illustration, if you were to send level 3 data in on commercial cards, so for every 10 million of commercial card volume you send, level 3 data you send for commercial cards, you will save roughly $100,000. We had a client that did about 400 million in commercial card volume a year, and them sending in level 3 data allowed them to save about $5 to $6 million a year. So the amounts that we're talking about are not trivial at all. They can be quite substantial. And the last topic I'm going to talk about, the last tip on optimizing interchange, is least cost routing. And least cost routing specifically refers to debit cards. If you were to take out a debit card out of your wallet or your purse, you'll notice it typically has a Visa MasterCard bug on the front, and it has a bunch of EFT. It may have one or two EFT networks on the back. EFT is electronic funds transfer networks like Pulse, NICE, Star, Interlink, Excel. With the implementation of the Durbin Amendment in October 2011, it required the issuing banks to include multiple payment networks on the same debit card. So that means that gives you as merchants options on how you want to route a given transaction. This particular strategy has more implications for retailers than e-commerce companies. However, for e-commerce companies, there's growing opportunity, and I'll touch on it really quickly. So when you have a logo on the front and you have a signature logo on the front, which is a Visa MasterCard logo, and then you have PIN networks on the back, what a lot of retailers do, they do it themselves, or they can have a processor do it on their behalf for a fee, is they identify for a given transaction which path is the cheapest for me to send this transaction. The basic path is, do I want to send it via signature rails or the PIN debit rails? And then an extra level of sophistication is, now that I've decided to send it through to the PIN debit rails, there's typically more than one PIN debit network available on the back of a card. Which network is the cheapest for me? So to do that dynamic sort of analysis and calculation on the fly, there are some retailers that are doing it themselves based on bin tables, or they're having a acquirer do it on their behalf. So guys, those are the 5 strategies that you can employ to optimize interchange and reduce your overall, by reducing interchange costs, you're reducing the overall cost of processing cards. I'm going to pause really quickly, and there's another poll question I want to.
Anand, there's a number of questions that have been submitted as well. So if you want, I can walk through them.
Absolutely. Let me just ask this poll question really quick. So
okay.
We talked about downgrades, and I don't know as retailers how many of you are monitoring downgrades as a percentage of your Visa MasterCard sales. But if you are, the question is, what is your downgrade percentage? And if you know it, go ahead and even if you don't know it, answer don't know. Go ahead and fill it out and see what the census is. All right, we're going to close the poll. I'm going to share the results with everybody. And about 40% don't know, 54% less than 5%, and then about 3% of the folks have really high downgrade opportunities. So for those, generally as a target, we like to have 1% as a target for downgrades. Anything at 1% or below is excellent. Anything above 1%, there's an opportunity. So with that, Mary Kay, let's pause and take some questions.
Okay, I'll go through them as they were entered. Number 1, internal costs for fraud. If the merchant is liable for the entire value of transactions, what costs are bared by issuers?
So today, if a customer has a chip card and you process that as a chip transaction, regardless of whatever chargebacks are claimed by the consumer, the issuer is liable for that given transaction. So that's an example when an issuer is liable. But I think the intent of the question is right. There's merchants, unfortunately today, especially in the e-commerce world, end up eating most of the fraud-related costs. So the amount of fraud that's absorbed by issuers has gotten less.
Okay. Next question. MasterCard actually charges merchants for AVS. So does your slide stating it reduces costs refer to just specific card brands?
So yeah, so Visa and Discover offer favorable interchange rates for AVS. As a best practice, we recommended doing it for all card types. You're right that there are some card brands that charge incremental monies, but AVS is important to do as a fraud check, not only as a way to reduce interchange costs for Visa and Discover, but it's also to mitigate fraud.
Okay, next question. Aren't there some states where you can't ask the customer for their zip code?
No, I mean, you're not trying to gather zip code data and mine it for marketing or demographic purposes. Is simply to validate a card transaction. There was a lawsuit in California years ago where a retailer was capturing and storing that zip code information and combining it with some other customer data to create profiles and marketing campaigns. But the intent behind our slide for AVS was simply as a validation of a card not present or keyed transaction. Nothing about storing card data.
Okay. Next question. In a card-present environment where EMV is enabled, is keying of transactions necessary? If yes, what are examples of instances where keying is necessary?
So there are retailers where if they have EMV capable terminals, they'll turn off the ability for the cashier to key in transactions. There are some scenarios where retailers find keying, they allow keying. So for example, in luxury goods, you might have repeat customers, and there are a lot of luxury goods firms that do what's called pre-sales, and they'll notify by email or other means, like by mailing out information that, hey, we have this special sales going on to the public, but you have an extra week to take advantage of the sale. If you want to go ahead and purchase, if you want to secure your item, you can come into the store or call it in. And in those instances, they'll call it in and someone will key in that transaction. So that's an example. There are examples where in corporate purchases, you might have someone to go pick up item from like an office supply store, but they don't necessarily have the card. It's their manager has a card, and the manager calls it in. Those are instances where you have a known customer base, where you know the customer and you're able to take their card numbers over the phone, where you allow the cashiers to key in.
But this is Greg. In our world, we use it as a backup. If the credit card terminal is on the fritz, our point of sale allows the person to at least key in the card and then get the customer out the door. So that's another example of using those chip cards where we just have to key them in because that's the only alternative we have to get the customer's payment at that time.
Okay, next question. Sales tax has to be 0.1% or more, even if the transaction is marked as exempt?
In order to get level 2 qualification, yes, that is true. However, if you have an exempt transaction and the sales value is zero, sales tax value is zero, but the card is a corporate card, a purchasing card, then you can send in level 3 data with sales tax being zero and still get level 3. But if you have, let's say, a Visa business card, let me take a step back and answer this way. All MasterCard commercial products are, as a rule of thumb, are eligible for level 2 and level 3. On Visa, only Visa corporate purchasing cards are eligible for level 3. Visa business cards are not eligible for level 3, and they're only eligible for level 2. So for a tax exempt transaction, you will never get Visa business card to qualify for level 2. However, if that card is a corporate or a purchasing card, then you can get that transaction to qualify for level 3.
Okay, great. Next question. For a regulated debit card, is it cheaper to process this as signature or PIN, or is it the same?
So for a regulated debit card, the interchange is identical. However, the card network fees are not. And the path you decide to send that transaction really depends on your industry code and the ticket size. If your ticket size is $500, it's going to be a lot cheaper for you to send that through a PIN transaction. If it is $5, it's going to be cheaper to send it through a signature rail. So it depends on some of the ticket size and industry nuances.
Okay. Next question. We have 3 more questions, and then we'll move on with the presentation. Is level 2 and 3 and debit routing available outside of the U.S.?
So the scope of this presentation is primarily the U.S. I don't know what other markets do. I don't know.
Okay. Are interchange rates determined by the acquirer? I recently changed acquirers and noticed different rates coming in.
No, interchange rates are set by the card networks. That can happen where you can have different interchange rates when you switch acquirers. There could be, you want to see, did they code you the right MCC code? Did anything change in your authorization and your settlement process? Are you getting the same types of qualifications that you did with your old provider as you are with your new provider?
Okay, and last question. You recommended sending the minimum data to qualify for level 3, i.e. 1 SKU versus 100 SKUs. Do you know how the bank uses that data?
Yeah, what the bank does is, let's say you have Acme Corp, and Acme Corp gives 10 of their employees purchasing cards. When those employees are using those purchasing cards in the marketplace and buying product, and let's say one of those employees buys 100 SKUs, the bank gets all that 100 SKU data, they package it, and they send it back to Acme Corp. Acme Corp ingests that data into their ERPs, and they can analyze spend. Where are their employees spending money? What are they buying? And they look to see, are there opportunities if a lot of our employees are going to the same places to buy goods and services, are there opportunities for us to negotiate volume discounts? What are our top sort of purchase items? Those sort of things. They can do spend analysis.
Okay, that's it. You can move on.
Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you, and as you move on, I'll go ahead and change the slides.
Great. Now that everybody has had a chance to think about buying a new card, now looking at that AutoNation screen for a while, thanks for the plug. So here's a little bit about us. We're the largest automotive retailer. Lots of good things going on about us, and that's our building in sunny South Florida, where I'm sitting today. And the last point I just want to talk about is brand extensions, that we're trying out some different things to help bring in some income in recurring business sectors, and try to offset some of those cycles with the new car manufacturers and what they're doing. So on the next slide, there's just a picture of where we are, the pink states. You saw on the first slide, the Drive Pink, were a huge corporate focus on breast cancer awareness, and so lots of pink going on in our world, and so that's where we're located across the country. And then here's about our brand extensions. So you can see Auto Gear, Protection Plans, Precision Parts, Collision Centers, AutoNation USA kind of competing against the CarMaxes of the world and auto auctions. So the Treasury Group has been very involved with how do we accept payments from all of these different ways in which we do it. Is it through the regular merchant agreements? Is it through private label cards? Things like that. So I just wanted to, an example is like with Auto Gear with Synchrony. A lot of you may have heard of them. They used to be called GE Capital. You can see their cards at the dentist, doctor's, eyeglass office, to finance things. So we have a relationship with them to help our customers buy some of the Auto Gears. And then also all of our manufacturers have card programs, and some of you may have a Ford card in your wallet or something like that. So when we first started off down this path, I've been with AutoNation for 15 years, and about day 6, I realized I knew nothing about it. It took us a long time to get where we are today. But our initial concerns had to do with just getting information. Where was it? How do we get it? And being able to actually do something with it. And we knew we had a big cost on our hands. So today our spend on credit cards, the interchange fees, and those well north of $20 million a year. We do about $1.5 billion on card sales per year. And so we just didn't have an idea, other than we knew it was one of the top 5 line items on our expenses. And when it came budget time, everybody wanted to know, how can we cut it? And I just wasn't equipped at the time to give meaningful answers, other than to say 99% of it you can't do anything about. So they would move on to the next topic, and I'd wipe my brow and say, next year maybe I'll have a different answer. And then we were trying to just didn't have the internal resources. So I wear the hat of managing our banking relationships, the day-to-day cash management, and then, by the way, I'll take care of merchant services for our 200 plus stores. Just didn't have the time or the resources to analyze the data. So we just looked for a way that we could find somebody to help us do that, and we didn't want our internal IT team to really be involved in it, because what IT person wants to know anything about credit cards? Well, heck, when I got my MBA 10 years ago, who would ever thought I would be doing anything with credit cards, right? It's just not something that a lot of people know about and have experience until you get into the job. So I was lucky to do some research and find someone to help us out with that. Let me just, on the next slide, we talk a little bit about, again, kind of our objectives and what we were trying to accomplish. Get some facts, not just intuitions, and let my management team and the rest of the company know, what they were paying for every time someone presented them with a certain type of card, and in what area of a car dealership they were presenting it in. Was it in sales? Was it in parts? Was it in service? Was it in the collision center? Just different customers paid different ways, and each one of those kind of revenue streams had their own average ticket size and cost and things like that. The biggest thing, when Anna was talking earlier about reducing these downgrades, that was a huge factor for us. When I first started, we were in an analog environment, so all of our credit card terminals was in a dial-up environment. We had no clue what kind of business cards, commercial cards we were getting, but we certainly knew that we were not submitting much of anything of level 2, or certainly nothing in level 3. So it was a huge saving opportunity for us, because we were well north of that 15% on that polling question that you guys had earlier, and we're now below 5%. We're not quite to that 1%, but we're getting there. So it takes time. And I would say when we really got serious about starting down this journey, it was over 5 years ago. So it takes time. And then once you have this analytic tools and all this data, you can see what you're paying for and what you're not paying for. And it's amazing what pops up. Another helpful hint, if any of you have access to data that's hitting your operations, your bank statements. We have a Treasury workstation. We're able to download all of our bank statements. When you do a scan through all of that stuff, you'd be surprised how many $35 hits you're getting per month from merchant services from 15 years ago that you never knew existed. And then, of course, when it comes time to negotiate, at least you now know what your basis is, and you can talk to them about, well, I don't think that's a good price because I've got this data and this data. And a lot of times you end up knowing more about your business and your fees than your acquirer does. And when you're in that situation, they tend to pay more attention to you. Let's talk about some good stories that we've been able to tell from this analytics. This is earlier we were talking about the Durbin, and it was like a give me from the government, but you look at this chart and you can just see, wow. And that's the kind of information we were able to show to management after October when this stuff started kicking in. This is the savings that we were able to realize, right? So very positive thing to have this analytics to be able to back up that, yes, intuitively everyone knew that we would have savings, but now they're able to see it very visually. It's very helpful. And then on the next one, you can actually see what we're talking about with downgrades. In the corner up there, you can see our downgrades in this 12-month period was around 9%, and it's down now below 5%. So just having that information and looking at it, yes, this is working, right? And then again, it's because of the level 2 and level 3 data that we were able to send. And then it really was over $1 million a year we were able to save because we were able to go to the next level, get off of an analog platform, submit level 2, level 3 data, work with our acquirers on their small piece of the pie. Your acquirers will give you a better price if you're on an IP internet protocol platform as opposed to a dial-up environment. Nice thing about the dial-up environment, it was very cheap for PCI compliance purposes because you didn't have any concerns. Nothing was in scope. And another thing that analytics allow you to do is to look at behaviors at your retail locations. You can compare across different stores, different locations, however you decide to set up your analytic table and hierarchies, and then you look for exceptions, and you can see, wow, this store is really doing something that's not typical of all of our other Ford stores, for example. And then you hone in on it, and you find out, well, somebody needed some training, or they had some disruption in service for some time, or we really need to change our internet connection there. So there's lots of interesting things you can get from that. So earlier, the 5 ways of doing things, the ABS, the off-settlement timeliness, level 2, level 3. I feel that AutoNation has probably nailed that pretty good. There are still room for improvements here and there as we fine-tune it, but if you look at the next slide, you can see kind of how our journey continues. Right now, we're focusing on the least cost routing. Our provider of merchant services, we have to tell them what they need to do. And so we're going through that process now, but you can see it's another huge opportunity where, we've got some room to push the PIN debits through our system. So we're figuring out the way to do that. And our retail operations are always scared of change. What do you mean? You mean the customer may not be able to send payments? Like, all right, let's try it out, and then we can, go at it that way. So we're hoping to save a bunch of money on the next phase of our journey of trying to save and optimize on interchange fees. So with that, I will turn it back over, and again, I'm glad I was able to help you out a little bit. If you ever need anything, just let me know. And a big thank you to the Merchant Advisory Group for putting this on.
Thank you, Greg. Mary Kay, if you'd like to continue with the questions.
Yeah, I think we just had one last question, unless more come in. Do most retailers provide level 2 or level 3 data?
The ones that we have worked with, yeah, they do. Because if they don't, here's the thing. The goal isn't to say everyone should. It really depends on how much commercial card volume you take in. So for example, if you do some analysis and that shows you that sending level 2, level 3 data is going to save you $20,000 a year, it's not worth your effort to engage your IT department to do that. So in that scenario, like, it's probably not worth it. The majority of your customers or consumers, you're not getting those commercial cards. However, if you do some interchange analysis and you're not sending in level 2, level 3 data, and you could save, a couple of $1 million a year, then in that case, then there's a good reason, a good business case to be made to send that data. And whenever we presented that sort of analysis to a merchant, they find it valuable to say, hey, this is a good story. We can engage our IT organization. We can build a business case that has ROI to build out this capability.
Okay, and then just a question that was asked earlier. Are auth rules different for credit versus debit cards?
Not between credit and signature debit. They're the same.
Okay. That is all the questions that, wait, hang on 1 second. We might have, here we go. One last question. Anand, how have those using least cost routing manage transaction volume commitments with specific debit networks?
So what the question is alluding to is, you have these EFT networks like Pulse, Nystar, Interlink. You as merchants, if you have meaningful amount of debit volume, you're able to go negotiate favorable terms with them. And so then you have this sort of mix of, you have these negotiated agreements that you're trying to manage to, and they might have minimum commitments of transaction you're sending. There are a lot of merchants that do an exceptional job of managing those sort of commitments, volume commitments. And it ends up being a dynamic process. So it's not one of those routing tables that you design today, you implement and you forget. It's something you have to kind of monitor on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So how do they do it? It's just, you have to have more monitoring of, not only what your commitments are, but what are the volumes that are going through each of the debit networks, and are you going to meet your minimum commitments that'll allow you to save the most amount of money? So it's kind of like, if you find that you're sending too much traffic to Interlink, you might have to update your routing table to send more to Pulse, so you can meet the Pulse minimum commitments to get their favorable pricing. So it's kind of a puzzle you're constantly kind of fine-tuning, I would say.
Okay, great. That's the last question, and I know we're near the top of the hour, so let me know when you're done and I'll close this out.
So guys, if there are any other questions, we'll, as we're kind of wrapping up, feel free to in the question box. But the way we look at card payment, it is a process just like any other you have in your organization, and it requires monitoring and maintenance. And if you can monitor it and maintain it, you can realize meaningful savings and understanding. So hopefully we've given you some food for thought, some very practical tips on how to reduce interchange and manage interchange. If you guys have any other questions that do come up, either for Greg or for me, you have our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us.
Great, thank you. Anand, can you just move to the next slide and I'll close this out. So I want to thank Anand and Greg and to everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope you have found this webinar to be of value, and you will be receiving the webinar survey shortly. As a reminder, the presentation slides and a recording of the webinar will be posted on the MEG members only page. Please plan to attend our next webinar titled MasterCard Connect and Merchant Onboarding that is scheduled for May 23rd. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.